Well, hi everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful week. Good to be back with you. We've made our way into the book of Galatians, Paul's letter to Galatia. A fantastic little letter. I hope that you're blessed by it. It's a letter that has to do with a topic that I think many of us are familiar with, and that is the idea of freedom, right? As Americans, we love our freedom. Our country was founded on the idea of freedom. We cherish it, we uplift it, we celebrate it, especially every 4th of July, but much more often than that too. And freedom is an important biblical concept as well. God says a lot about our freedom. And because it's important both in the Bible and in our country, I think it's important to take an especially deep look at the idea and to just consider, how is our freedom in Christ different or similar to the freedoms we talk about as Americans? Because I think there is some overlap, but I also think there are some important differences, again, in the way that God talks about freedom and how we use that freedom and what that freedom is for versus how our culture today kind of talks about the freedoms we have as a country. There are some similarities, but there are some differences. In the book of Galatians, in large part, has to do with circumcision. There were some who came to Galatia telling the people there that the way you know you're a part of God's family, the sign and the marker of being in that family, of being a person of God's promise, is circumcision, and that in order to stay in the family, you have to be circumcised. And Paul says, look, that's not living in the freedom that Christ has called you to. What makes you who you are, right, isn't circumcision; it's Jesus. And when you are aligned with and attached to Jesus through baptism by faith, right, you are free. And so Paul will say in chapter 5, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Look, don't let anyone come in and try to take the freedom you have in Christ away. Don't let anyone tell you that the center of your faith is anything other than Him. And so if someone shows up on your doorstep telling you or your kids or a member of your church that you're not quite free, that you have to do this other thing in order to be a part of a family, you stand firm, right? This is something that we take our stand on because of the freedom we have in Christ. And yet Paul will write something a little bit interesting later on in that same chapter, chapter 5, verse 13. He writes this: You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. Paul will say, yes, we're free, but how do we use that freedom? In one sense, we stand firm in it. We don't let anyone take away from it. But in another sense, we give that freedom away. We lay our freedoms down so that we can serve and love other people. So here's one way to think about it. In the story of the Bible, we're told that uh, Paul would not circumcise Titus. Now, why would he not do that? Because he saw it as a threat to Titus's freedom. That he didn't want anyone to come into Titus's life and demand that he be circumcised, right? And he wanted Titus to think that he had to do this thing in order to earn God's love or to stay as a part of his family. And so he wouldn't do that for Titus. But then there's Timothy, and we're told that Paul actually does circumcise Timothy. Why? Why wouldn't he do it in one case but does in another? Because, well, he wanted Jews in particular to hear Timothy's message. And Paul knew that if Timothy went out speaking to some Jewish people who highly valued circumcision, that they might not listen to Timothy because he wasn't circumcised. They wouldn't take him seriously. So what does he do? He tells Timothy, look, you're going to lay this freedom you have. You're free to be circumcised or not circumcised. So it doesn't matter. But because you're free, you're going to lay that freedom aside and you're going to undergo this act so that more people can hear the gospel. And that is a message I think we could hear a lot more of. We tend to want to hold on to our freedoms, right, and keep them close to us. But Paul says there's a time to lay those freedoms down and give them away. Because we know we're free and because we know there's nothing in the world that can take those freedoms away from us in Christ, we serve and we sacrifice for other people out of the freedom we have in Jesus. Well, I hope you're blessed by this letter and hope it leads you to reflect on the freedom that you have in Jesus. And I look forward to being back with you next time.